Hi everybody, I'm Austin Hopsteck. I am here in my nursery, and right now I'm going to go over a couple of points with James Kugel's How to Read the Bible, the readings for this week. Um, one of the book starts off with a lot of personality, in my opinion. You can tell that the author is uh, just very passionate about this subject, so that's one thing I do appreciate. Um, One of the things that he talks about in um, in the first chapter has to do, I believe it's four assumptions of ancient interpreters when they come to the text. And a lot of these are very similar to a lot of traditions that I have noticed, even in contemporary churches today. Um, And those four assumptions were that the Bible was fundamentally cryptic, is number one. Number two, um, that the that they assumed that the Bible was a book of lessons directed to the readers of their own day. They also assumed that the Bible contained no contradictions or mistakes, and that they believed that the entire Bible is a divinely given text. So I do see that those four assumptions as very common among lay people in a lot of congregations today. And I think one of the reasons for that, it appears that there needs to be some sort of consistency so that there isn't any cognitive dissonance when it comes to theology and biblical interpretation, because cognitive dissonance is hard to work with. Um, But Kugel does point out, in fact, that to uphold all these assumptions, which I think are fair to put on the ancient interpreters, but I also think um, they, they might be a little short-sighted, um, only to the extent that I think a lot of ancient interpreters knew a little bit more of what they were doing. Of course, we have the midrashic um, commentaries of the text, but I do think that they had a little bit more freedom with that than simply assuming that there were no mistakes. I think that's something that developed more as um, a response to modernity. And now, while that may be something that was consistent among ancient interpreters, I think it does um, inhibit. It makes another assumption to assume that those four assumptions were always among the ancient interpreters, and that they were narrow-minded. Um, perhaps I'm not gathering that what he's saying totally in that. It's been a couple days since I've read it, but I do think that the ancient interpreters had a little bit more to do with provocative thought than just those four assumptions. I think there were disagreements among them then, but I may learn more. Um, I also found interesting that he brought up the in the second chapter when it comes to the creation, the account of creation. I love the thing that he points out with the two creation narratives. I think it's really important to stress that for a lot of people. And as far as seeing, the rhythm of Genesis 1 through chapter 2, verse 4, and seeing a completely different story starting in Genesis chapter 2. And clearly, there are some different authors there. Um, but at the same time, I think uh, and it was good to remind the readers of that, and to not look at Genesis 1 and 2 and 3 as this sort of scientific deduction about how the universe came to be. I think what Kugel's strong point is in asserting that a lot of the Bible is folklore. And I think a lot of religions have that sort of folklore. In Greek mythology, you have Odysseus. Um, with Norse mythology, you have how the gods interacted with humanity, how horrible Odin was. You have you have ancient Anglo-Saxon mythologies, which inevitably developed into Lord of the Rings. But what I just find so interesting is that he actually really emphasizes that even in the creation narratives. Um, and I think it's important to remember that there's a lot of folklore in Scripture that doesn't take away, and I believe Kugel gets at this really well, that doesn't take away from the truth of it. It just takes away from the the factuality of it, which, in my opinion, and in Kugel's opinion as well, is not necessary. It isn't necessary for the Bible to be factual all the way through. That's not what it was meant to do anyway. And I don't think the ancient interpreters always saw it that way either. And I get the idea from Kugel that he believes that they did see it that way. And maybe I'm wrong. Paul did talk a lot of times in the New Testament about Adam and um, a lot of the different Old Testament stories in a very literal sense. But what I think Kugel is getting at is that we have to look at the Bible as it is. Yes, we're allowed to see the inconsistencies. Yes, we're allowed to ask questions. Yes, we're allowed to see the conflicts. And I think there's beauty in that. And I think what we're seeing there is an evolution of thought about what God was like and what the story of God was like in that world. And I think Kugel gets at that very, very well. Um, and as a side note, for what they don't tell you, um, I think the book would have been an absolutely uh, helpful, beneficial resource for me my freshman year. I think going through it, I'm very excited to see how it prepares us for graduate school and academic work when it comes to studying scripture.